All right. Greetings, friends. My name is Ian McKenzie, and I'm the founder of the Mythic Masculine podcast platform, as well as one of the co-founders, co-stewards of the upcoming Cascadia Men's Conference, which will be the first ever of this gathering. It's going to happen this August in the Squamish Valley, just north of Vancouver, Canada. And I'm delighted to be here with one of our esteemed guests, poets, speakers, who's going to be joining us at this upcoming conference, which is really around the themes and the labor of myth, of culture work, ritual, the soul, and so much of the mystery in between all of those things. And I'm delighted actually because this is also the first time that I'm getting to speak with my guest here. And we just had a little pre-talk before this time is going live, and we actually thought it was appropriate to start with a poem before pretty much anything else. And so, Cliff Taylor, I'm delighted to welcome you and to welcome one of your beautiful poems to start us off.
Hey, thank you, Ian. And hello, everyone out there who's listening to this. Yeah, I mean, I'm like many folks, I'm a man of many interests, many talents, many passions, many paths. And one of them is poetry. I really love to, I don't know, turn poems into things that are exactly what the deepest parts of us are looking for, longing for, even if we don't know we're looking and longing for those things. So I've been writing lots of poems for a long time. And in preparation for this little Substack Live, I was thinking if I brought a poem, what poem should I bring? And a couple years ago, I did a couple poetry workshops for kids. After 20 years of reading poems to assorted, motley adults, some local school teachers invited me to come do some workshops for their kids, like ages 3 to 11. And that was a whole different kind of experience. We're used to bringing these, I want to say, like the big guns of our souls to all of these equipped, capable, scrutinizing adults. And then we find ourselves in a room of like 40 kids who are just pure energy. And it was some good radical fun, I got to say. But one of the questions that the kids asked me, I think on like the second time I went to visit them was, what's one of your favorite poems? And you only have so much time to think. And this poem came to mind. This is a poem I've read at a lot of my readings. It's from Coming Back from Sundance, which is a zine I made in my late 20s, my first little poetry collection, uh, probably a decade before I put out a book.
Hmm.
And yeah, it's a poem I wrote in my 20s that still got the stuff, or at least I like to think it still has the stuff. So this poem is called Alaska. It meant a lot to me when that Indian truck driver came into the truck stop. I was cooking there at the time, working the graveyard shift. I didn't know anything about being Indian. I knew that I was one, but that was about it. When I was done with things, I went out and talked with him. He talked to me about Alaska, his life, his family, the way things were for our people nowadays. Nowadays, he said, we hunt a different kind of buffalo. Just the look of his old face made me feel something I didn't have the words for. He was the only Indian truck driver that came into the truck stop during the whole year that I worked there. I didn't know why, but talking to him seemed to mean a lot to me. I told him I wanted to go to Alaska someday. He looked at me reassuringly and said, "You will."
Mm.
You know, I dropped out of college and I found myself working at this 24-hour truck stop in my hometown. And I was the overnight head cook. And I don't know, I guess like a lot of 20-year-olds, I was just lost in the whirl and blur of my own coming of age story, which I feel like I half understood and half most definitely did not understand. And You're always looking through that ticket window to see who's out there. And I saw this Indian truck driver, and I can't say I was a total embodiment of successful indigenous instruction at that point. I was far, far from it. But I was raised to go say hello to elders and go introduce myself. And even though I had what was essentially a chronic terminal case of crippling shyness and crippling self consciousness, there was always something bigger and more persistent inside of me that would compel me to go introduce myself to these elders. So I kind of had to like crawl over the crumbling mountain of myself to do it. But I did it, and I went and sat and talked with him in the booth there for a little bit. And I never would have imagined that years later I would have written a poem about it. Uh, Sidebar, writing poetry was something I completely hid from the world because it ran contrary to the models of masculinity, which were heavily present in my family, in my state, in my people, and in my culture. And writing pretty words was not going to impress any of the men that I was rolling with, either peers or uncles or, any of them. So I hid that
Mm.
poetry. But sidebar over, little did I know that one day I would write a poem about that moment and wind up sharing it with people for the next 20 years. You know why? Every time I read that poem, I re-ask myself why, and I get a different answer. And in this moment, Ian, I really feel like that elder, that Indian truck driver who I never saw again, who was probably in his 60s, who was talking to me about his retirement and how he was gonna, finally move to Alaska for good once he wrapped up this, necessary career as a truck driver. He communicated a blessing to my young, mostly lost self. And that blessing had so much potency that it has lasted to this day. And
Mm.
so I feel like when I read that poem, I get a chance to share the blessing that he shared with me with others. And that's that we do live in a world where there are people both our age and people who are older than us that have the capacity to see that tender, luminous thing in the center of our soul. And not only do they have the capacity to see it, but they can put together the right package of words to let that person who's being seen in the moment know they're being seen. And they can create a memory that honors the essence of that young person's soul in the moment, that then becomes like a physical belonging that they can carry forward like a map piece, or like a page from a book, and they're searching for the rest of the pages of that book. So that Indian truck driver, I didn't have the consciousness, the vocabulary, the understanding, or the awareness to know what was going on in that moment. But I did have the being to receive in the moment what that cool Indian truck driver gave me. And it was the Alaska that is maybe the real Alaska, and maybe it's the Alaska of the human soul, the big, far away, untamed place that's waiting for you once you walk the path of who you really are long enough. So I love
Mm.
that Indian truck driver. I love reading that poem, and I love sharing what lives on in that kind of timeless memory moment that was made back then, you know?
Mm.
So
Mm.
thanks for letting me read that.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that piece and the beauty of that, the blessing continuing. And, you highlight a few things for me. One is just how perfect it is that certain things can only really be said in a poem or spoken or transmitted in a poem. There's just something very true about that. Prose, other ways, it's just not it. No, there's a poem. That's the thing. And also, you speak about this capacity of the elder to offer that blessing, to offer that nourishment or that being seenness to youngers. And for me, what I'm feeling into is again, a question around why gather, right? We're talking about the upcoming Cascadia Men's Conference happening this August, of which you are a speaker to those who are joining just now live. And there's something in that architecture that is often missing today in this kind of this nourishment that is part of a village way. I think that has been lost for so many, of course, including Indigenous folks and moderns as well, who maybe have old ancestral memories of that was the way it was too. And so, one of the reasons why we gather, and I'd be curious to hear for you more. What is it? What is drawing you or excited you about the invitation to go to a conference such as this, given your work, given your cultural labors, your own path, your love of myth and poetry, and all the rest?
Well, you know, there's many levels to it. And on one level, I'm super excited because I know I'm going to be in the presence of a lot of folks who not only are very passionate about the things that I am passionate about as well, but they've put the time in to like build out uh, their passion into something that might even be close to something of a bona fide superpower. So a lot of folks are going to show up with their built up superpowers so that we can serve these things that are so important to us and that we can share about these things that are so important to us. And something gets to happen that's never happened before when a group of folks who have never met can figure into a meeting or a gathering. And if everyone's on the same page in terms of the prayers they want to bring, the intentions they want to bring, the gifts and medicine that they want to bring, uh, that kind of configuration that realizes something that's never happened before is fundamentally what I'm about. So that's one level of it. More specifically, as a men's conference, I have I've never had the honor or the blessing to attend a men's conference, and yet this reality of masculinity obviously has been a part of my personal life since the get go. And it is also just interwoven into all of these different aspects, layers, and dimensions of my people's culture, both the culture that we have successfully regenerated, the culture that was never lost, and then also the culture that we have been working to recover, working to rebuild, working to, you know, get back in a good place. And, it seemed like I want to, my entry point into men's work, I think, was the same entry point for a lot of folks, and it was Robert Bly's book, Iron John. I'd never heard of men's work before. I'd never thought of it, at least in the terms that it's known as and known through in this context, in this framework. And yet, in our culture, as a Ponca guy from Nebraska, I'm Ponca, I'm Santee Sioux, I'm Lakota Sioux, I'm Chippewa, and I'm also German and Irish. So, spent the first 34 years of my life in Nebraska. Lots of not lots of native community happening there, but in our culture, we also have this heavily wounded masculinity that is like some I want to say like some bad shorthand that is getting passed around, and it's kind of like really, it's like I want to say these aren't the words I would normally use, but I want to say it's like a sub virus of colonization or another virus of colonization, and we have our traditional culture, which is equipped with many antidotes for that virus. But because we're just this giant mix of models and iterations and successes and failures. Um, we need the good work too, you know? So I'm really excited basically because when Robert Bly passed, I read Iron John again. And then I found your podcast, and I found all these other podcasts. I found all these speakers, all these luminaries, all these teachers, all these healers and investigators of the subject. And it really kind of sparked this personal process of viewing how I was raised to be a man, how I was initiated to be a man, how I was taught to be a man by mentors, elders, medicine people, uncles, relatives, and other men in my life. And I really started seeing it through the lens of men's work to decode, elucidate, and illuminate much of what had happened in an implicit way. And so I guess I'm hoping to arrive as a native spiritual man, a native poet, a native thinker, someone who is deeply invested in a healing path for several decades. I'm hoping to arrive as someone who gets to function as a mutually beneficial bridge between the indigenous culture that I know and the men's work culture that you all are carrying so beautifully and valiantly and eloquently. So that's what I'm hoping to share some of what my people have for the benefit of everyone else who is there, but also to receive from what everyone else is bringing for the benefit of my people. And specifically on this issue of masculinity and indigenous masculinity, which is experienced a lot, worked on a lot, thought about a lot, but in my personal experience, isn't talked about as much, isn't talked about anywhere near as thoroughly as I get to hear you all talk about it on your particular
Mm,
podcast. So that's
mm,
some of why there's a big burning bright light of good energy inside of me when I'm thinking about this conference in
mm,
Canada, August.
mm. Thanks, Cliff. Lots of beautiful threads there. And one thing I want to highlight is so, for those of you just joining, this is Cliff Taylor. He's one of our speakers and presences who's going to be at the Cascadia Men's Conference this August. And we're going to be offering a talk on Indigenous masculinity. And so, this is what we're circling around here. And also in your own works, I mean, as a poet, a storyteller, you have several books. And one is Notes from an Indigenous Futurist. And just that concept, right, indigenous futurist, is you can short circuit perhaps the modern, right, who's sort of only holds an archaic understanding of that. Indigenous wisdom must pertain to the past, not the future, not the AI technocratic utopian vision, right? I would love to first unpack what is that. What is indigenous futurism, if that's my correct way of saying it, and why do you understand like it's so important actually for what's needed now in terms of where society is going as a whole.
Well, this is fun to answer. First off, I should say, you know, for I guess we're still at a place where this needs to be said fairly often, and it's that uh, one native person can't speak for all the individuals that comprise the 800 plus tribes of Turtle Island. But one native person can have a good time speaking as one native person, especially when the reason they're doing it is because of how much they love their people, how much they love Island, how much they love all their other indigenous relatives, and how much they love people and everyone. So that's good to say first. I did have when that book came out, I felt like I almost had it like a funky, cool alchemical formula when folks ask me about Indigenous futurism, and off the top of my head, I might not be able to reproduce it as excellently
Mm,
and clearly as I once had it. But I want to say futurism is what our ancestors see of the coming, inevitable, best, most beautiful future, and then communicate to our soul, which our soul then communicates into our imagination, and our human self gets to pull endlessly from all those visions that are appearing in our imagination that our soul is catching from the ancestors who have objective sight that allows them to see into the future. So we get to source our imaginations, our visions, our fantasies, our brainstorming, our talks, and what we got to share from our connection system with our ancestors and our connection system with our deep self. And I want to say the languaging and the mind stream of our mysterious, cool, sacred soul. So indigenous futurism is that process happening in an inspiring human way, you know? So that's
mm,
kind of how I look at it.
mm,
And I feel like who
mm.
doesn't want to get in on a little bit of that? And it's universally applicable. It's not like Indians only. You know, this is indigenous futurism that everybody gets to be a
Mm,
part of. You know, dig
mm,
deep enough inside of yourself, and you qualify.
mm, mm. Beautiful. It strikes me as I've also been in my own explorations of visionary possibilities and seeing generally en masse with the culture, the modern capitalist society, like it kind of withers the imagination for so many people of what's possible. And I think that's why we have so many movies that are apocalyptic and zombies or climate breakdown and strife. And it becomes difficult, I think, for folks rooted in the very uh, bio biospheric destructing system that has foreclosed on a lot of imagination and possibility to truly imagine something different, actually. And so this is why I think the value of what you're naming of indigenous futurism and this connection to your ancestral vision, and also I suspect a connection to true relationship to place and to land and life that allows for like a different kind of possibility to emerge that isn't a sort of undercover misanthropy, which I think a lot of moderns have, right? Because it's like, oh man, we see all the destruction humanity's wrought, and we say, man, there must be nothing really good that comes from humans. There's this sort of there's grief in that, but the possibility of truly feeling that it might be different becomes harder to source. Except what you speak to, I think, offers something different. But I wonder if you see it that way too.
You know, this is I've been like an artist my whole life, and art has saved my life. Art has proven itself as a viable, sacred path for myself and for people. And so I've thought a lot about this stuff, not just as a native guy, but as an artist, a native artist. And as a native artist growing up in the 80s and in the 90s and trying to make sense of what was going on with my family, my dad and his siblings and my grandpa and his siblings and just like all the Ponca folks that I grew up around. You're trying to use your insight abilities, your understanding abilities to make sense of why there is so much maybe suffering, maybe so much self-destruction, maybe so much alcoholism and substance abuse. Why is there so much life wrecking grief? And so you're trying to peer into that, and really, you see there are so many compartments to that. There are so many elements and domains to that. And one of them is the human imagination. And I believe that, you know, empire, I'm not sure what the best term is. I'm not. I like to use lots of terms to keep ourselves from just being like almost like self capsulizing. We want to stay expansive and game. So I don't know if you want to say like empire. Empire has taken the majority share of the human imagination offline because of the potentials that are innate inside of that. And I'm saying that now because I think it applies for everyone. It's keeping us, keeping the arms of our spirit are tied behind our backs. But in my 20s, when I was kind of, really peering into, why are my people suffering so much? I saw that there was so much bleakness, so much cynicism, so much narrative of nothing is ever going to change and there's no hope. And one way to keep that narrative solidified and almost like kind of some like nefarious jail keeper of the human psyche in to keep that in place is taking the imagination offline. And I like to imagine how my people lived hundreds of years ago. And when I would do that, and when I do that as a native artist with a highly active imagination, it only made sense to me that my people back in the day, my ancestors also had beautifully active imaginations. And so, I would think that's part of the healing work that needs to be done as well. You got to turn people on to the power of their imaginations. And there are so many wild, wondrous, lustrous, inspiring, unstoppable, unkillable, ancient things that are ready to run down the runway of your imagination if you can get it even close to a semblance of what it once was. But a lot, just like the men's work, this stuff needs to be articulated for folks. The moment you articulate it, the front of their mind catches it, and they're like, and then their soul is like, oh, this is real. I need to investigate it. This is real. So you're transmitting seeds that they then get to water and sunshine with their life, with their pursuits, with their curiosity. So it's good to talk about the
Beautiful.
imagination. The imagination has been slashed in half by a damn unkind sword of this big dominant culture that we're trying to, you know,
Mm,
remake, reimagine, re-envision, and change.
mm. You beautiful. Thank you. There's a line actually in your recent piece on Indigenous grief, actually, that I think speaks to this. Oh, a few lines actually beautifully. And I want to highlight the fact that in the mythopoetic men's movement, largely galvanized by Robert Bly, Michael Mead, James Hillman, these crew, that grief has been so much a part of it. Grief has been really at the center of it, I think, since the beginning. And there's a real beautiful intelligence, I think, to that. And you speak here in your piece, actually, that I just want to read a brief line here. Because I think, we're talking about the future, but all of a sudden we were talking about grief. And I think this is a piece. You say, ungrieved grief is stolen future, they say. This is a quote from your beautiful piece. The future is made from grief that has been grieved. The grief not grieved is essentially the stuff the future needs for its growth held back. Is vibrancy and vitality for the unborn generations unintentionally hoarded and held on to. Grieving is required to make a habitable future, they say, and the future needs humanity's healthy grieving. And you say, yes, relatives, this is truly how it happens. Oh, one more beautiful line. Sorry, I know I'm jumping around your lines because they're so good, but one last line was, the grief of our ancestors becomes medicine, and the healing of grieving liberates Indigenous peoples everywhere. I'm going to drop a link to the piece in the chat as well for folks who want to check it out. But I just found that such a beautiful rendering of the link between possible futures, imagination, and grief, actually. And I wonder if you might speak to a little bit more to that kinship.
It's so personal. I get emotional not just thinking about the recent experiences of which that piece was describing, but just thinking about what is tugged on when you begin to tug those threads, the massiveness, the largeness of it. And, you know, my partner has gotten into grief work over the past couple of years, and it has been a major blessing uh, for myself and my life. And I feel like grief work and men's work, as I've had the luck of bumping into them and having some deep experiences of them, uh, they really occupy the same place in my mind when I think of myself, when I think of my dad, my brother, my aunts, my uncles, when I think of so many of my Ponca relatives, of my Lakota relatives. And it's it is heartbreakingly wild that there is this thing at the center of our identity, at the center of our life choice making system, at the center of our self and life interpretation system. It is heartbreakingly wild that there's this thing at the center of those things, and we don't know what the word for that thing is. It is so painful personally and so painful going so many generations back that we do not know how to utter the word of what it is. And the word of what it is it's grief. And so I have so many relatives that are basically, they are walking with their arms full of crushing grief, and yet they've gone their entire life without uttering that word once. So, and it's the same with masculinity. We're one kind of man our whole life, and yet we've never said the word masculinity once. So these things are just deeply connected with each other. And I want to start talking more about grief. And I kind of came up with a joking slash not joking term, indigenous grief advocate, kind of like the clown foot to get you through the door. If you stick a big clown foot through the door, no matter how serious the household is, they're gonna let you in like, wow, what's this guy? But then you come in and you got more to say than just to act as a clown. So I kind of say indigenous grief advocate, but we need to talk more about grief because we are all carrying it. We are all on many levels defined by it, and yet we're not versed in its materials. We're not versed in its journeys. We're not versed in its processes. And also, I want to say like potentially heart makingly wild is that grief is waiting to become medicine once we give it our time, our attention, and our tears. And that medicine is like, uh, it's the superpower stuff. It's the stuff of how to create a pathway to healthy, healed indigenous masculinity across an atomic bomb blasted wasteland. You might think it's impossible, but if you turn that grief into medicine, that medicine can lightning fast create a pathway across that impossible landscape. And that's one version. And that grief that we're all carrying can be turned into a, a customizable medicine that serves the best part of our individual selves, but also serves uh, our ancestral lines X amount of generations back that are also waiting for the impossible to become the foundation of a pathway, a healing pathway forward. All these things are just powerfully, intimately, potently linked. And some of what I want to cover in my talk is connected to, I almost want to say, like the grief at the bottom of the wound of indigenous masculinity. And digging into that, we can catch a mirror glimpse of all these different kinds of griefs that are at the bottom of our own particular masculinity wounds. And again, digging into the grief at the bottom of our masculinity wounds, we can suddenly find ourselves in tiny ways and in big ways empowered uh, in the work of turning that grief into medicine and turning that unexamined masculinity into seasoned masculinity. That lone wolf, I'm all by myself masculinity into brotherhood masculinity, mentored masculinity, eldered masculinity. So that's some of the stuff I want to talk about, Ian. And they all are uh, they're parts of a puzzle box that we're all trying to solve, that we've been tasked to solve in this lifetime.
Mm, mm. Man, I can't wait. And I'll say that there's something again about collectively coming together like this. That if you're a man listening, maybe this grief work is unfamiliar to you. Like you said, maybe you've never uttered the word or thought that it might be at the source well of so many aspects of discontent. And it might be showing up as rage or anger or substance abuse. Ways of trying to escape, actually, not knowing actually how to get down to the source. The power of coming together, not just with men, and as in, I've been to also grief rituals where we've come together, in mixed groups, but especially powerful as men when we come together in this way. And that during our time together in Cascadia, there will be one of the evenings we will be venturing into some of this grief work together. But there's a power in the field. I think the field of grief that is generated together that invites in, I think, its own intelligence that I think you also speak to so well in your essay, of which I've also dropped in the chat for folks. We're going to wind this down now. Just a beautiful foray into this time and the upcoming conference. And you teased a little bit by saying you have a new piece coming on Iron John and offering
Yeah.
an indigenous perspective. I would love, if you're open to it, at least spill in a little bit of what you found there in viewing that story, which my understanding too comes from Europe, sort of Bavaria, Germany, sort of modern day Germany area, collected by the Grimm's brothers. Of course, Bly revivified it in the book that Iron John became, quite a phenomenon. It continues to ripple to this day, as it has for you, as it has for me. And I would love to hear a little bit of your take on it and what you've discovered by looking at it through your lenses.
I feel like I'm about a third of the way through the first draft, and I hope to have this essay done before August. It's just something to share, just kind of like we've spent the last 30 or 40 minutes sharing. And off the top of my head, one of the most fantastic things in Iron John to me, from indigenous spiritual man's perspective, is that in this book of several hundred fairy tales, Robert Bly found this fairy tale that he just I want to say, like, it took on a life of its own, and it decided to become a communicator of a map for, I'm gonna say, like, say deep restored masculinity. And that is such a it's beautiful to witness, because none of us can just like uh s- uh patch something and make it pop to life for ourselves necessarily. None of us can just like pound something and have it come to life in a way that is then going to be like a magic owl on our shoulder for the rest of our lives, whispering everything we need to know when it comes to this new calling that has global implications and global impact. But that's kind of what happened with the story of Iron John and Robert Bly. And there are so many different parts to that when you examine it. But one of them is, and maybe this is what we should end on, is that it's a illustration of how the other world desires to collaborate with us when it comes to our unfolding calling and our different reasons for why we're here. And in Robert Bly's case, one of the reasons he was here was to strike the iron and spark this men's movement to life. And the other world decided to utilize this fairy tale of Iron John as a communication device slash system for him. And you can't talk about any of this stuff without including the other world. So maybe we can do ... and end it there.
Mm, a beautiful lacuna, as they say. Thank you, Cliff Taylor.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
our time together. Just again, felt like a foray into the beautiful work that you've been doing, and also lead up to the Cascadia Men's Conference, filled with a number of other presenters and speakers and elders and folks all coming to collaborate for this to happen. I'm going to drop the chat in the chat one more time, the link to the website where tickets available, all that kind of stuff. But once again, Cliff, pleasure. Thank you for your time, and I very much
Thank
look
you,
forward to
Ian.
gathering with you together in the next few months.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Ian.